The Chapel of Mystic Horror by Seaberry Quinn. Narrated by Mike Vendetti. Chapter 1. The wind was blowing half a gale, and little spits of sudden snow were whirling through the gray November twilight as we alighted from the accommodation train and looked expectantly up and down the uncovered way station platform. "Seasonable weather for Thanksgiving," I murmured, setting my face against the howling blast and making for the glowing disk of the station-master light. "Bedouin pelican, yes," assented Jules de Grandin, sinking his chin an inch or so lower in the fur collar of his overcoat. A polar bear might give thanks for a warm fireside on such a night. "Trowbridge, I say there, Trowbridge!" A voice hailed from the lee side of the little red brick depot as my friend Tandy Van Ripper stepped forward, waving a welcoming hand. "This way, old-timer. The car's waiting. So's dinner." "Glad to meet you, Dr. Grandin," he acknowledged as I presented the little Frenchman. "It was mighty good of you to come out with Trowbridge and help us light the hearth fires at Cloisters. Ah, then it is a new house that you have, monsieur?" de Grandin asked as he dropped into the seat of Van Rippen's luxurious roadster and tucked the bearskin rug snugly about his knees. "Well, yes and no," our host replied. "The house has been up in America for something like 8 years, I believe, but it's new to us. We've been in residence just a little over a month, and we're giving a regular old-fashioned Thanksgiving party by way of housewarming." "The Frenchman nodded thoughtfully. "Your pardon, monsieur. It is perhaps that I do not speak American well, but you did not say the new house has been up in this country for only 8 years? I fear I do not apprehend. It is the house stood elsewhere before being erected here?" "Precisely," Van Rippen agreed with a laugh. "The Cloisters were built and rebuilt, I suppose you'd say, by Miles Betterman, shortly after the close of the World War. Betterman made a potful of money during the war, and a lot more in lucky speculations between the armistice and the Treaty of Versailles. I reckon he didn't know just what to do with it all, so he blew it in a couple of 100,000 on an old Cyprian villa. Had it taken down stone by stone, shipped over here, and re-erected. The building was a sort of remodeled monastery, I believe, and took Bitterman's eye while he was cruising about the Mediterranean in the 20s. He went to a lot of trouble having it moved here and put up, and everything about the place is exactly as it was in Cyprus, except the heating and plumbing, which he added as sort of an afterthought. Quaint idea, wasn't it?" "Decidedly," the Frenchman agreed. "And this Monsieur Betterman, did he so soon tire of this expensive toy?" "Not exactly. I got it from the administrators. I couldn't have afforded to pay a quarter the price Betterman spent on the place, let alone give him a profit on the transaction. But the fact is, the old boy dropped off suddenly a year or so ago. So did his wife and daughter. The doctors said they died from eating toadstools by mistake for mushrooms. Whatever the cause was, the whole family died in a single night, and the property would have gone to the state by a cheat if the lawyers hadn't dug up some 90-second cousins in Omaha. They bought the house at public auction for about 1/10 its value, and I'm figuring on holding it for a while. It'll be novel, living in a place a Knights Templar once occupied, eh?" Very novel indeed, monsieur," de Grandin replied in a queer, flat voice. "You say the Knights of the Temple once occupied this house?" "So they tell me. Some of their old furniture is still in it." Grandin made an odd sound in his throat, and I turned quickly to look at him, but his face was as set and expressionless as the features of a Japanese Buddha, and if the half-smothered exclamation had been meant for conversation, he had evidently thought better of it, for he sat in stony silence during the rest of the drive. The snow squalls had stopped by the time we drew up at the house, but the wind had increased in velocity, and in the zenith we could see the gibbous moon buffeted about in a surf of wind-blown clouds. Against the background of the winter sky, the irregular outline of the cloisters loomed in a foreboding silhouette. It was a high, rambling pile of gray masonry, in which the characteristics of Romanesque, Gothic, and Byzantine architecture were oddly blended. The walls were strengthened by a series of buttresses, crenellated with battlements and punctuated here and there with small cylindrical watchtowers. The windows were mere slits between the great stones, and the massive entranceway seemed fitted for a portcullis. Yet a great hemispherical dome rose from the center of the building, and a wide shallow portico with graceful fluted columns topped by Doric capitals stood before the gateway. Cocktail hour had just struck as we passed through the wide entrance to the main hall, and a party of slick-haired gentlemen and ladies in fashionably scanty attire were gathered before the cavernous fireplace as they imbibed the appetite-whetting amber drinks. It was an enormous apartment, that hall, clear 50 feet from tiled floor to vaulted ceiling, and the darkness was scarcely more than stained by the flickering glow of blazing logs in the fireplace and the yellow beams of the tall ecclesiastical candles which stood singly in high wrought-iron standards at intervals along the walls. Draped down the bare stone sides of the hall hung a pair of prodigious tapestries, companion pieces, I thought, depicting particularly gory battle scenes, and I caught a fugitive glance of a black-armored knight with a cross-emblazoned surtout, hacking the turbaned head from a saracen and the tag end of the Latin legend beneath, ad majorem Dei gloriam. Piloted by our host, we mounted the wide balustraded staircase to the second of 3 balconies which ran round 3 sides of the long hall, found the big barn-like room assigned to us, changed quickly to dinner clothes, and joined the other guests in time to file through a high archway to the oak-paneled apartment where dinner was served by candlelight on a long refractory table set with the richest silver and most opulent linen I had ever seen. Greatly to his chagrin, de Granlund drew a kittenish, elderly spinster with gleaming and palpably false dentition. I was paired off with a Miss O'Shane, a tall, tawny-haired girl with tapering, statuesque limbs and long, smooth-jointed fingers, milk-white skin of the purebred self, and smoldering, rebellious eyes of indeterminate color. During the soup and fish courses, she was taciturn to the point of churlishness, responding to my attempts at conversation with curt, unisyllabic replies. But as the claret glasses were filled for the roast, she turned her strange, half-resentful gaze directly on me and demanded, "Dr. Trowbridge, what do you think of this house?" I temporized, scarcely knowing what to reply. "It seems rather gorgeous, but—" "Yes," she interrupted as I paused at a loss for an exact expression. "But what?" "Well, rather depressing. Too massive and medieval for present-day people, if you get what I mean." "I do." She nodded almost angrily. "I most certainly do. It's beastly. I'm a painter of sorts." She hurried on as my eyes opened in astonishment and her vehemence. "And I brought along some gear to work with between times during the party." and told me this is Liberty Hall, and I could do exactly as I pleased, and gave me a big room on the north side for a workshop. I've a commission I've simply got to finish in 2 weeks, and I began some preliminary sketches yesterday, but—" She paused, taking a sip of Burgundy, and looking at me from the corners of her long, brooding eyes as though speculating whether or not to take me further into her confidence. "Yes?" I prompted, assuming an air of interest. "It's no go. Do you remember the Red King in Through the Looking-Glass?" "The Red King," I echoed. "I'm afraid I don't quite." "Don't you remember how Alice took the end of his pencil in her hand when he was attempting to enter a note in his diary, and made him write, 'The white note is sliding down the poker. He balances very badly.'" I must have looked my bewilderment, for she laughed aloud, a deep, gurgling laugh in keeping with her rich contralto speaking voice. "Oh, I'm not a psychopathic case, I hope," she assured me, "but I'm certainly in a position to sympathize with the poor king. It's a Christmas card I'm doing, a nice, frosty, sugar-sweet Christmas card, and I'm supposed to have a Noel scene with oxen and asses and sheep standing around the manger of a chubby little naked boy. You know, quite conventional sort of thing." She paused again and refreshed herself with a sip of wine, and I noticed that her strong, white-fingered hands trembled as she raised a glass to her lips. My professional interest was raised. The girl was a splendid, vital animal, lean and strong as Artemis, and the pallor of her pale skin was natural, not unhealthy. Yet it required no special training to see she labored under an almost crushing burden of suppressed nervousness. "Won't it work out?" I asked soothingly. "No." Her reply was almost explosive. "No, it won't. I can block in the interior all right, though it doesn't look much like a stable. But when it comes to the figures, something outside me, behind me, like Alice behind the Red King, you know, and just as invisible, seems to snatch the end of my charcoal and guide it. I keep drawing." Another pause broke a recital. "Drawing what, if you please, mademoiselle?" De Grandin turned from his partner, who was in the midst of recounting a risque anecdote, and leaned forward, his narrow eyebrows elevated in twin arches, his little round blue eyes fixed and unwinking in a direct, questioning stare. The girl started at his query. "Oh, all manner of things," she began, then broke off with a sharp, half-hysterical laugh. "Just what the king said when his pencil wouldn't work," she shrilled. For a moment I thought the little Frenchman would strike her, so fierce was the uncompromising gaze he bent on her. Then, bah, let us not think too much of fairy tales, pleasant or grim. If you please, mademoiselle," he returned. "After dinner, if you will be so good, Dr. Tobridge and I shall do ourselves the honor of inspecting these so mysterious, self-dictated drawings of yours. Until then, let us consider this excellent food which the good Monsieur Van Ripper has provided for us." Abruptly he turned to his neglected partner. "Yes, mademoiselle," he murmured in his deferential, flattering manner, and then the bishop said to the rector,